Since I was a child, I have been a firm believer in the existence of God. I rarely talk about this experience to others. This experience of mine was the best gift God ever gave me. I felt like I left my body and entered a realm beyond reality. It was not simply a dream or a hallucination, because I was clearly aware of my existence. When this experience occurred, I felt a special connection with God. I was able to perceive the presence and infinite love of God. 20 years after the near-death experience, I also saw scenes from Judgment Day. I have suffered from asthma since I was very young. When I was 11 years old, my mother left this world because of cancer. The news was a huge shock to me and I felt very sad. Shortly after my mother's death, I felt very helpless and lost. However, during that difficult time, something incredible happened. One night, I was lying in bed. Suddenly, I felt a strange phenomenon, and my body gradually fell into a state of complete paralysis. This experience was very scary and frightening for me. I struggled and tried to move my body. No matter how hard I tried to move, my body felt like it was completely out of control. At the same time, I found myself unable to make any sound. In the process, my breathing began to become difficult and the symptoms of an asthma attack began to appear. It felt like there was an invisible pressure pressing against my chest cavity. I felt like I was in a state where I had no control over my body and my breathing was restricted. My soul was leaving my body. All my pain was gone. A spinning tunnel appeared in front of my eyes. This tunnel seemed very long. When I entered the tunnel, I noticed that there were many tiny balls of light around me. I was curious about these balls of light, which looked like the souls of other people. These spheres of light emitted a soft glow, and they passed quickly around me, as if each one knew exactly where it was going. It was as if there was some special connection between me and these balls of light. This made me no longer feel alone. As I turned my attention forward, a dazzling light flashed in front of my eyes. This light emitted a warm energy. I could vaguely see a huge square building. Many souls passed quickly by me, all moving toward that square building. I understood that that was our destination. I felt a gravitational force that drew me deeply forward. As I entered into the light, a beautiful scene unfolded before me. A meadow full of flowers. Each flower bloomed with brilliant colors and gave off an enchanting fragrance. The building emitted a great light. There was not a single shadow as far as I could see, everything was so bright. It was as if the light could penetrate everything. I was immersed in this beautiful sight, admiring every detail. I knew that I had come to a pure world, the home of our souls. Here, there is no pain or worry, only endless love and peace. I felt my soul was liberated and reborn, merging with this wonderful existence. Curiously, I walked toward the square building. It seemed to be suspended in mid-air and exuded an aura of mystery. As I got closer to it, I was amazed to find that it was studded with many huge gems at its base. These gems were of various colors. Each gemstone was so huge that they shone brightly. The gems were all perfectly blended with each other. It was a spectacular sight I had never seen before. When I looked up, I noticed a high wall above the gems, which seemed to be made of a golden material. This wall gave me a strong sense of security, as if no evil force could penetrate this place. Here, the purest love pervaded everywhere. I found 3 doors in the wall, and they were far apart. I walked up to one of the doors. It felt like the door was made of pearls. It glowed softly, as if it were polished marble, and its beauty could not be described in words. Nothing on earth could compare to it. I looked down at the floor in front of the door, which looked like it was made of glass. This glass was so thick that I could not see through to its interior. I knew that this was my home. In this moment, I felt a strong sense of belonging. I knew that once I stepped through the door, I would return to my true home and be with those I loved. Standing in front of the gate, I knew that Jesus was on the other side of that door. Even though I could not see him or hear his voice, I could clearly feel his presence. This feeling filled my whole heart. My emotions became so mixed that I couldn't help but cry. Because I wasn't ready, I didn't want to leave my father and sister for a while. This thought made me feel sad and heartbroken. I understood that once I stepped through that door, I would not be able to return to my father. Suddenly, a dazzling angel appeared in front of me. Her presence gave me an overwhelming sense of peace. Her beauty could not be described in words. That angel gently told me that I could not stay here yet. She told me that now was not the time for me to leave, that I still had a mission to complete. With the angel's departure, I re-entered my body. At this moment, I was able to breathe normally again and my asthma symptoms were gone. This was another opportunity given to me by Jesus to continue my journey. There was a time when I would often have dreams about the end times. Most of them were very scary. I didn't understand at the time why they were being shown to me. When I was 31 years old, an unusual experience changed everything. I was lying in bed at the time. Suddenly, I felt a warm hand reach through my rib cage and into my chest. The touch was full of supernatural power. I could clearly feel the hand wrapping around my heart, as if giving it strength and warmth. In that moment, my heart began to slowly stop beating. Time seemed to freeze, and the sensations in my body gradually disappeared, while my consciousness became clearer and sharper. I knew that I was being taken out of my body and my soul was beginning to enter a whole new realm. The process was so swift and peaceful. I felt myself becoming lighter and no longer limited by the confines of my body. Everything around me became bright and clear. The next thing I knew, I found myself in my old home, which was a relatively remote rural area. I saw a sidewalk on a hill, a road I had never seen before. I also saw my father. He was dressed in plain clothes and walking slowly down the sidewalk. I hadn't seen him in a long time. After walking a short distance, he suddenly stopped, found a chair and sat down. Just then, there was a sudden loud boom. I turned to look at the sky and noticed that it was beginning to grow dim. Lightning cut through the darkness of the sky and illuminated the surroundings. The sound of thunder made me panic. The sky seemed to roar. Suddenly, a huge crack opened in the sky, like an unfolded scroll. The crack spread rapidly, expanding in every direction. At that opening, an intense bright light shone on the earth. As I stared at the light, I could see the figure of a man and knew exactly who it was. My attention turned back to my father, and I shouted to him, "Jesus is coming. Today is the day of judgment." However, no matter how hard I shouted, my voice seemed to be blown away by the wind and did not reach my father's ears. I watched my father sitting in a chair by the roadside, seemingly lost in his own thoughts, oblivious to all that was happening around him. My mood became restless, hoping to make him aware of the coming of Jesus and the approach of the day of judgment. In the midst of the chaotic scene, I saw many people running and hiding in fear, clutching various valuables in their hands. My eyes turned to the sky again, and I saw the souls of the dead, floating upward, drawn by some invisible force. Then, I was drawn by some invisible hand to ascend to the sky. In an instant, I was in the presence of Jesus. He was dressed in a dazzling white robe. His hair was dark brown. His presence was full of purity and power. As I gazed at Jesus, I noticed a distinct hole in the palm of his hand. The hole, as if it were an eternal mark. I also noticed Jesus' feet, one of which was partially exposed, while the other was hidden behind the robe. I knew that the hidden foot bore the same signs of trauma. To the left of Jesus stood a woman. I knew it was the Virgin Mary. She was dressed in a beautiful blue robe, with her long hair covered by a shawl. Around him, I saw others being brought in as well. Jesus could see into the heart of every person and examine their actions and thoughts. The scales of righteousness swung, weighing the goodness and sinfulness of each person. Some were brought to Jesus with faces full of repentance and humility. They confessed their faults and sought God's forgiveness and mercy. Their sins were forgiven, and they were led to the path of light. However, there were also those who were terrified. Remorse and regret filled their hearts. Their sins were revealed. They were condemned and faced eternal torment and separation. Here I also saw my deceased mother. She looked so beautiful and younger than she looked at the time of her death. I stood beside her and we gathered to sing. Suddenly, I felt a strong force push me away from my mother. I was pulled back into my body. The scene in front of me became instantly blurred and I realized I was returning to the real world. I opened my eyes and found myself lying in bed. My heartbeat gradually returned to normal. This Judgment Day scene seemed to be just a dream, but it brought me revelation and insight. I lay quietly in bed and recalled the good times I had with my mother. Even though I could no longer be with her in the real world, I knew that on another level, our connection still existed. This experience has given me a deeper understanding of life and death. It reminded me to cherish the family around me. It also inspired me to pursue goodness and justice, and that we will be judged by God. Judgment Day is real. Now, I am more determined to walk the path of life. Whether I face challenges or enjoy joys, I will always remember the scenes of Judgment Day as guidance and motivation. I will pursue the true meaning of life in a more meaningful way and strive to become a good person. I stood up and walked to the window. The sunlight sprinkled on my face. Warm and bright, as if it was God's favor and blessing. When I was 15 years old, I was passionate about tennis. My cousin was a tennis coach and I looked up to him very much. Whenever I saw him gracefully wielding his tennis racket, I hoped to be like him one day. His house was not very far from mine, and there was a big tennis court in his neighborhood. That court became a place I often went to. Every weekend, I would run to play ball with him. I was very surprised by my cousin's movement and quick reaction. I learned a lot of skills from him. He always encouraged me and told me that if I practiced hard enough, I could make progress too. I remember it was a weekend. The weather was very nice that day. I met up with my brother and some of his friends to play tennis. I was very excited because I hadn't played with him for a long time. After playing for about an hour, a big wind blew across the court. We thought it wasn't a big problem and the wind would pass in a while. But after a while, the wind was still strong, so we decided to play a little longer and go home. I stared intently at the ball, trying to predict its trajectory and speed, and preparing to make a catch. However, it was at this critical moment that I accidentally got distracted. Just as I was about to catch the ball, I felt a violent shock. At that moment, I lost my balance and fell to the ground uncontrollably. My teammate's tennis racket accidentally hit me in the solar plexus, and the blow came swiftly and suddenly. It was as if I had been struck by lightning and my head was in a state of confusion. The world in front of me became blurred and distorted. I was lying on the ground, and the sounds around me were gradually blurring. My head felt unusually heavy, and I even felt a wave of nausea. Suddenly, I left my body and I was floating in midair. I could clearly see everyone standing around me, and their expressions were filled with horror and worry. I saw my cousin kneeling beside my body, pain and helplessness written all over his face. He tried to wake me up and pat my cheek. But I was unresponsive. I observed everything around me and did not feel any fear. On the contrary, a sense of calm enveloped me. It was as if I was in another world, and my connection to the real world was fading away. Although my body was no longer moving, I could feel that my consciousness was still present. The next thing I knew, I entered a light. This light emanated a warm and peaceful aura. I felt it calling to me and guiding me in an unknown direction. It was as if my soul had become lighter. Under the light, I felt an endless energy and harmony. As I went deeper and deeper, the scenery around me began to become clear. I felt I was stepping into a whole new realm, one that transcended time and space. I felt like I was merging into the energy of this light. I was no longer a single individual, but was merging with the infinite existence of the universe. The concept of time disappeared and I felt an eternal presence. I was greeted by a very beautiful lady. I saw some familiar features in her face. She smiled as she approached me and said gently, "I have been waiting for you." This statement struck me as very strange and I was filled with doubt inside. Why was she waiting for me? The lady seemed to know what I was thinking before I had a chance to say anything. She patiently explained, "Because you are lost. I've come to help you find your way again." This statement surprised me even more, and I pressed, "How did you know what I was thinking?" She smiled and replied, "Because in heaven, there are no secrets. Thoughts and emotions are transparent here, and we are able to share each other's presence." I followed up by asking, "And how do you plan to get me back on the right path?" She replied, "When you were created, you knew what you were going to be. Unfortunately, you have lost your way. If the soul is lost, it cannot find its way home." She goes on to explain that each person has their own unique mission and purpose. Your existence has meaning. But in being lost, you have forgotten your true purpose. Near-death experiences are God's way of helping them. In this particular realm, some souls choose to stay in heaven. Some souls choose to return to earth and continue back to their families. God loves all of His children and He wants them all to accomplish what they have promised to do. He does not judge them or feel anger if they do not succeed in their first attempt. God's love for us is unconditional. He gives us free will and allows us to experience and learn on earth. Even if we lose our way or experience failure at some point, God still gives us the grace and opportunity to start over. I followed up by asking, "You say I've lost my way. Then what do I need to do next?" "I need more guidance and help." She smiled and replied, "In order for you to find the right path, you must talk to your father." A little confused, I asked, "You mean I have to talk to God? But He should be very busy, right? Heaven is different from the real world, she explained. God is omnipresent, and he can connect with everyone's heart at the same time. He is not too busy to listen to your heart. He is eager to communicate with you and help you find your own path. I feel very relieved to hear these words. In spite of his infinite power, God is willing to establish a close connection with each person and to listen to their prayers and conversations. Under her guidance, we came to a huge throne. The throne exuded an aura of majesty and holiness. The throne was magnificent, studded with precious stones and jewels, which shone brightly. The armrests of the throne were carved with exquisite designs. Behind the throne was a magnificent sight, as if it were a miniature of the entire universe. Although I could not see the image of God, I could clearly hear his voice. The voice seemed to be the chorus of millions of angels, full of love and power. God called out my name. It was as if I had returned to my true home. I was surprised to realize that God knew my name and that he was concerned about my existence. God asked me, "Do you remember what we discussed earlier?" Confused, I replied, "Father, I forgot, I don't remember ever talking to you." This made me feel a twinge of shame. Suddenly, a bright light shone on me and touched me deep inside. My memory began to come back gradually, and I recalled the events of the past. I had dreamed of becoming a tennis player, and I put a lot of effort into it. However, I failed to achieve what I had hoped to achieve. This failure frustrated me and made me question my choices. After that, I talked to God and I decided to become a doctor and give back to the community by helping others. God is a loving Father who did not criticize my previous failures or feel angry with me. Instead, he reminded me in this amazing encounter that he was always there for me, guiding me to find my own path. God was willing to talk to me and guide me even when I was lost. This conversation made me re-examine my dreams. I know that no matter what I have gone through in the past, God still loves me. I went on to say, I know what I should do now. I'm ready to go back. My voice was full of determination and resolve. God gently replied, I will give you another chance. If you feel that this life is a failure now, you can also stay. You can try to return to earth again later. After hearing God's words, I was very surprised. God didn't ask me to return to earth, he was willing to give me the right to choose freely. He understood my inner confusion and bewilderment, and he was willing to respect my decision. I couldn't help but ask God what would happen to my family if I chose to stay. God replied that your family would be here to reunite with you, but not until after they had completed their mission. Deep down I knew that I could not leave my family on earth. I expressed my decision to God, Father, and I was sorry that I could not leave my family on earth. God said, then here's the deal, there will be a place for you in heaven when you finish your mission. I look forward to your return. His voice was full of anticipation and made me feel his understanding and encouragement. The lady next to me asked me, "Are you ready to go back?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, ma'am. I am ready." Then, she smiled and said, "One more thing before you go, would you give my regards to your father?" This surprised and confused me, and I hastily asked, "How do you know my father?" She didn't answer my question directly. She said that there are some things beyond the limits of time and space, and that our meeting was not by chance. I felt more confused by her words and my heart was filled with curiosity. I sensed a special connection between her presence and mine. When I opened my eyes again, I appeared in the hospital. I was surrounded by a group of medical staff, who were busy working. I also saw my mother. She had been crying, and when she saw me reawaken, her expression became much calmer. I looked over at my mom and she was holding my hand tightly with concern and love in her eyes. I eagerly asked the medical staff around me, what happened? How did I get here? The paramedic approached me and she said softly, "It's okay, you're going to be fine. You have just experienced an accident and we are doing our best to provide you with treatment." My father also came into the room when he heard that I was awake. I said to my father, "A lady in heaven asked me to say hello to you." The people around me looked at me with strange eyes. When I got home, my father took me to sit on the couch with a hint of curiosity on his face. He said to me gently, "Son, I would like to hear more details about that lady. Can you describe her and let me know who she is?" I took a deep breath and started describing the lady. I told him that she had thick, curly blonde hair and eyes as bright as a deep lake. Her smile was full of warmth. I tried to remember every detail of the lady and described her as clearly as possible to my father. My father listened quietly, and an expression of disbelief gradually appeared on his face. Suddenly, my father stood up and walked into the family storage room. I followed him curiously, wondering what he was up to. He found a very old book. Then he took out a picture from it. I looked carefully at the woman in the photo. She had gentle eyes and a sweet smile, and I felt a familiar closeness. My eyes widened and I excitedly said to my father, "Yes, that's her. This is the lady who guided me in heaven." He explained that she was your grandmother, my mother. She left us before you were born. I was blown away by the fact that I couldn't understand why I was meeting her and that she looked so young and beautiful. We sat together and my father shared with me his memories of my grandmother as he described her kindness and wisdom.